I swear there are stairs where now there is only space. If my feet disappear, will I make my way into your arms? The problem is fog, spilled over the stucco, tea colored, numbing the lake's surface tight against the shoreline, unable to even skip a stone underwater and never coming back. We will find nothing is visible but an occasional swallow's silhouette through the mist. Meanwhile, my heart falls knowing acres are left unseen and unknown. I tell you, it feels like our present is rapidly the future we didn't know was coming. Someday, what we lost in a world dyed sepia will chew holes in our stuffing and leave us suspended over unwanted histories. The long view is hidden. I found the parade of the no longer living arrive uninvited and prevent me from speaking truthfully about what I feel today. As a child, I ran through this town and noticed the neglected front yards with lengthy feather grasses dancing with me as I whooshed by. I came to believe only I could see what this felt like. I have come to believe my voice is how I will find my way. I feel alive despite the world as pure memory and predictions. Some wait for armfuls of fog to lift, not me. Here, climb into this rowboat, disappear. A poem, Fog, from our guest tonight, Julia Blumenreich's book of poems, Blue Angel of a Day. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The focus of our broadcast is to give our viewers the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia. And tonight we have someone who has contributed to that rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and the love of poetry, and that is our guest tonight, Julia Blumenarik. So let us welcome Julia. Julia is the author of Meeting Tessie, Artificial Memory, Blue Angel of a Day, and The What Underfoot. Julia's poems have been published in a number of journals, including Oblique, Central Park, Ariel, and Chain. She has served as one of the founders and editors of Six, a poetry journal based here in Philadelphia. Julia is a recipient of a Pennsylvania Arts Council fellowship for her poetry. She has read her work widely at a variety of venues, including the University of Pennsylvania, Temple and Brown University, the Cleveland New Musical Festival, and Small Press Distribution in San Francisco. Julia collaborated with the visual artist Wendy Osterwell on Reforesting, Homage to Gil Ott, a poetry, sculpture, installation, print show at the Painted Bride Art Center here in Philadelphia. 4 of Julia's poems have been set to music composed by Kyle Smith, and they were performed as part of Lyric Fest. Julia worked for a number of years as a poet in the schools before becoming a 4th grade teacher, first 8 in West Philadelphia, and after 25 years at Germantown Academy in Fort Washington, where she has recently retired. Since working in the schools, Julia has received the Milken Family Foundation National Educator Award in the year 2000. So welcome,
Thank you.
Julia.
Thank you.
Really very, very happy to have you. So I just want to go back to start our discussion with that poem that I read, Fog. And sometimes, I read a book of poems and I love all the poems, but there's sometimes a one poem kind of stands out and keeps my attention. I keep coming back to it, and I keep coming back to it, and reading certain things, perhaps overreading certain things into it. And Fog is that poem that really um, caught me. And there's lines from in that poem, and it's a magnificent poem. Like the one line,
Yeah.
"I came to believe my voice is how I will find my way," and then the line says, "I feel alive despite the world as pure memory and predictions. Some wait for armfuls of fog to lift, not me. Here, climb into this rowboat and disappear." So, can you discuss this symbol of fog,
Hmm.
which, for me is really a great symbol of what we as artists and poets,
Right.
face and struggle with, and the fog of the world right now. Can you
Hmm.
discuss that and how
Sure.
that is a perspective that you have in your writing of poems?
Sure. First, I just want to thank you, Charles, for inviting me and say how honored I am to be here, and what I think all artists of any kind can so appreciate if somebody really studies their work and thinks about it. So it's such a great honor to have you bring up these parts of my poems and think about what the project is that I'm doing in my writing. It helps me think about what I'm doing. So I think I think writing in general for me is a way to discover something about not so much the experience of fog, but what it's like to come out of that, to find oneself out of a fog, out of the fog being kind of what life is, and trying to understand. I think that art often is about finding out our own truth, and I mean, why else would we create art than to discover something about ourselves, or about the human condition, or about the world around us, or about um, politics, for instance, trying to understand something about the world. So I think fog represents that whole poem is about trying to find something about myself, trying to understand something about myself. And I notice in that poem, and because I'm going to read some other poems tonight, that I have this image of a rowboat comes up quite a bit in my poems. And I think the idea of having a vehicle to try to discover something about the world, having a way to move through the world, and for whatever reason, I don't know the exact reason, but I've chosen this rowboat. So I don't
Hmm.
know if that illuminates.
Well, yeah.
I don't know real illuminate of us, right?
Hmm.
But I started with that image of fog, and
Hmm.
I also was imagining being. I often think about being a child, maybe because I've worked with children for so many years, or because I'm trying to understand myself or understand the world. You always go back to your origins, right?
Yeah.
You go back to childhood.
Yeah. There's
So.
so much in your poems about your life in the past,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
some of the tragic parts of it. Of course, the
Mhm.
loss of your
Mhm.
husband, and then the very tragic death of your brother, and
Mhm.
how you have approached that. Which, and I think I said to you off camera, I think those the poems that I read about, that experience and that grief for you, are it's not like there's a whole book about that, but there's a focus on that is so powerful for other people who are grieving, and maybe people who are grieving the kind of very tragic loss that that you experienced as his sister. And I think you're, and in the one book, it's almost like your poetry moves to a different level when you start, focusing on that in your work. And can you talk about, that part of your poetry, that
Hmm.
part of
Hmm.
wrestling with grief? And I think one time you said you never really get over it. It's
No.
just how do we reconcile ourselves with this experience like that? And there is that reckoning, and I'll still go back to the poem Fog when you say, but how language leads you through this life and through this fog and through these challenges. Can you
Yeah.
talk about the grief part of it?
Sure. I mean, that is something. I mean, I think that none of us can escape, right? I mean, just being human, we experience our own grief and loss. And I have this line in one of the poems I'm going to read tonight. It's a newer poem, and the line is, "Even humans have loss before loss." And I feel like that's grief is. I'm trying to understand it and to understand what loss is and how not just to write about loss, but to write about the experience of it, which I think is different than writing what the, and I mean, certainly that comes out in the poems, but it's more about the resonance of the loss and the and the resonance of grief and getting behind, if you can get behind the grief. Like, I don't know, I think because I'm also trained as a visual artist, I see things like a foreground and a background, and I think about getting like how grief, it's not just the telling of grief, it's not just, but it's getting behind the grief. And as you said, that you never get over, this, again, this, I don't know, this belief in Western society that oh, well, you can take a year and then you should be over it. I mean, it always, even when I think I'm not going to write about my late husband, or I'm not going to write about my brother's suicide, somehow it will creep in, because it affects, it's there, it affects everything. And I think maybe I put it in my work also because not only am I trying to understand it, I'm trying to have a conversation with my readers about it. And I think that I would imagine it would make a reader think about his or her own experience of grief and loss.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, it's very. You mentioned, and I didn't know this, Julia, that you were also a painter. And I'm always fascinated when I meet someone who has this dual talent, with the brush and with the word, on the line. And so I ask, and we have a good friend in our workshop who's a terrific artist and a terrific poet. And I've asked her some times, how does that influence, and how has that helped to build your poetry? Can you speak to that?
Sure. I think that I'm just very visual, so I see images all around me. And it ties in with being in the world and nature, which we can talk about as a theme later. But I really feel that color and image is such a central part of my work. And also I feel that the actual, I remember writing is about, again, discovering one's truth, and it's almost getting behind what the images mean. I keep talking about that in our conversation here, but I think the physicality of getting behind the words, getting behind the language, trying what happens when you say an image and put an image, like let's say standing in line at the grocery store and you put that next to thinking about something about my brother, like what happens? What happens tangentially in the poem when you put those images together? And I feel like that's because I'm a visual person. And again, just in descriptions that I use in my poems, I think that comes from being a visual artist.
I'm sorry, Julia.
No, I was just going to say that I tried, but I didn't. It didn't satisfy me to put words into my paintings. So I feel like I didn't feel like I could do that well. But I feel like I can put art. I can put visual into my poems, so I can work the other way.
And painting does show up in your, and specifically I would be referring to the one poem or one artist that you in a way dedicate, and that's D. Chirico, if I'm saying this, and is painting the uncertainty of the poet, which I found is fascinating.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people, I myself did, a lot of people don't know about his contribution to 20th century art. And I didn't until once again reading poetry and finding things out, and it prompts you, well, let me go look at this a little more. Can you speak to that
Sure.
particular work?
Well, I want to give a shout out to Leonard Gontarek, who Charles and I are in a wonderful workshop with Leonard, and that came out of a prompt that Leonard gave us in our writing workshop to pick a surrealist painter and respond to that painter's work. So I looked through different artists that I knew, De Chirico or Dali or Magritte, and I found this painting that spoke to me, and then try to not describe the painting, but write about the resonance of the painting in myself as a poet. What did it bring up in me? And again, I'm going to read that poem tonight. Again, my late husband appeared in it, and it's not to say that every poem I write is about grief or loss, but again, these themes come up. They keep surfacing even when I don't expect them. But I think that's also the beauty of making art. And I also just want to give a plug for, I think we artists are so lucky, right? We're so lucky that we have this means of expression and creativity, but I feel like everybody has the creativity in them. I mean, we could say in our society, but somebody's a creative business person or somebody's creative in sports, certainly, but I think everybody also can make art if they're given the right environment. And I felt like that's what I did as a poet in the schools, and I worked with teachers to prove to them. I always felt like I wanted to prove to them that they were poets too, and that they would use poetry then in their classroom if they felt like poets. They would use it to with the kids to give that gift to the children. But I don't know. I feel like I just went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No. And speaking of that, just as you as a teacher, somebody who has given of yourself to help others, who are poets and who are poets in the making. And we've had a brief discussion about your influences. the people who influenced you and
Yes,
helped develop
yes.
you. Surely,
Hmm.
I think for both of us, being in the workshop with Leonard Guntarik has
Hmm.
helped to our voices in poetry to evolve.
Right.
But I know there's other dimensions in your background that I think are very, very interesting. So could you talk
Hmm.
about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I After college, I was in New York and I was painting, but I was also writing. And I was fortunate. I was in a program that gave me the opportunity to study weekly, actually to go to his apartment, to John Ashbery, the poet, great poet and critic. So I got to work with him on my writing every week for an extended period of time. And I feel very much influenced by his his approach to writing. And he said, again, this is where what I think about a lot. He said, quote, "I write with experience in mind, but I don't write about them. I write out of them." And I've been
Mm,
talking about that tonight. He also said, "Eat, says the hunger, and we plunge blindly and again into the chamber behind the thought." So
mhm,
again, it's what I'm talking about. Getting just, it's not just the thought, it's what's behind the thought. And in addition to Ashbury, when I moved to Philadelphia and I was in the Temple program, I had so many great teachers, one of them being Susan Stewart.
mm,
And she is a tremendous influence on me in terms of, she says, "I wanted to explore the patterns, beliefs, and social life beneath the surface of everyday existence, particularly the continuity of themes of love and war." So again, it's getting beneath the surface. So it's not only what's there. Not that there's anything wrong with writing about what's there. It's just my sort of path of discovery seems to be to get under what's there. Or
well, you had a good fortune to be, in contact with and influenced by both of those folks. Susan
mhm,
Stewart, myself, I just saw her once at a reading at the Philadelphia Library, and I mean,
mhm,
I just thought she was extraordinary, and
yeah,
I got her books and it just confirmed how
mhm,
wonderful her poetry is. So to have her as a mentor and as a teacher, that's
yeah,
a real gift. So yeah, I mean, tremendous influences, and forces that bear in on your art. I guess the last thing, Julia, I would want to ask you, and I think I ask everybody, what do you hope that your readers of your poems and poetry books get from them? I mean, is
mhm.
there a hope that you have? I know we don't sell and market our poets as this is a book about X or Y, but
Right.
there is a certain hope in us that people will find some type of understanding and pleasure from our
Mhm.
poems.
Right. I certainly hope that, again, I go back to a quote from Susan Stewart that says, "I find writing poems to be a means of uncovering truth, including the indelible love of truth that drives us to write in the first place."
Mm,
And I hope that readers of my poems will uncover truth, truth that they can relate to. Like I feel like in my poems, there's often some declarative lines, like the line that you read in Fog about, I'm trying to get um, out of myself. I'm trying to lose myself. Or I have just a few examples. I have a line: "To learn something new, the path you took yesterday, take that, pledge yourself to familiarity." I feel like I'm trying to teach people. No, teach is the wrong word, because I would never feel like my poems were teaching something, but
mhm,
I'm
mhm.
trying to have people think about what their own sense of their self is, what their own sense of the world is. That's what I'm trying. Like, it's not that I'm telling them my sense. I'm wanting them to think about their own sense of the world, and to have a almost like a bell, right? When you ring a bell and or you're meditating and you hear that chime, and it's not the initial chime, it's the after the chime that is so affecting. So
you have a line. It's funny you mentioned it in the poem After School.
mhm,
It's almost like a motto. It's called lifting out of myself. You create that line, and I said that isn't another key of what we have to do. It's a lift out of ourselves
yeah,
to be
yeah,
in poetry, or even to be in certain things that to write about that we're not necessarily familiar with, and
right,
like your conversations with nature. I really find it is a lifting out of yourself,
yeah,
to be like in that one poem. It's a conversation with the geese, and to say it like
mhm,
that, to lift out of
yeah,
yourself is a fascinating perspective to look at it.
yeah. And I think that you find out, like, I often put nature in my poems
Mm,
because it's almost like I'll have images in my poem. You could probably track it in my poems.
hmm
There's images, and then there's nature. I love animals. I love flowers and trees. Like, and I often think about how to write about the sky in an original way.
hmm
And I'm trying to, again, through nature, I find the best metaphors through nature, and and learn so much from the natural world about
hmm
really the recklessness of love, the difficulty of just being human, what we can learn from being, like, walking in the woods, um,
hmm
and I want to understand something more, and perhaps it's not yet available about the world
hmm
by exploring nature. Sometimes I do, like, I'm going to read a poem tonight called Mute Swan, that I did research on swans because I realized that I
mm
didn't know very much. They're fantastic creatures, right?
Yeah.
But I sorry, I wanted to learn about them, and then that influenced this poem that I had no idea where it was going. So there's a weaving of what I've learned about the mute swan and then my own self.
Yeah. Isn't
And
it fascinating what poetry does for exploration? I
yeah,
mean, there's so much I don't know and I didn't know about nature, but was forced really to better understand. And I mean, I'm a great Google searcher and
hmm,
I go deep into it. And so, but people don't, a lot of people don't realize the amount of research sometimes that goes behind the creation of a poem.
yeah,
And surely what you just mentioned is an example. So, we've talked a lot about influence and about different poems, but our viewers surely want to, Julia, hear you read your poems. So I'm going to
sure.
back off right now. I'm going to give you the
Okay,
full screen and you
okay.
can listen to your wonderful poems.
Oh, thank you, Charles, so much. This has been great to have the opportunity to, like, what a privilege to talk about one's work. I'm going to read a couple of poems from Blue Angel of the Day. I'm going to start with that. Then I'm going to read some poems from The What of Underfoot. And then I'm going to read some new poems, a couple of new poems. So I'm going to start with the first poem oh no, not the first poem. Sorry. I'm going to start. Oh, I know. I'm going to start with a poem called What We Know, which is about being the power of being an artist, being a poet or a painter, and also about the natural world, the power within the natural world and what we can learn, what we know. Poems cannot cure hunger, but these words can turn meaty and juicy, even become delicacies. A celadon bowl with 5 lemons awaiting the moment when the painter begins the still life, when at an easel a child artist, dissatisfied, draws right over her figure in a grease pencil, then uses brushes dipped in water, colors cerulean, orchid, papaya, orange red, bringing up the dawn behind the blackness, a silhouette, leggy with arms open, forgiving. Pay attention to animals too, their forms demonstrating speed, strength, and grace. The needle-tailed swift spending its entire life on the wing. The sailfish or billfish hunting in packs, reaching 70 miles per hour, ambushing fish shoals. The blue whale, undeniably the strongest, largest, breaching its fluke in a watery ballet. And the leopard pulling with 7 times the force of a muscled swimmer, preying on animals 10 times its body size, risking everything, which is like when one chews on words or paints awfully close to the edge, trying not to look down, for we all started out floating, the current taking us here. And I'm going to read the poem that Charles mentioned about the Chirico painting. And again, this poem is really an exploration of the painting and of this surreal painting. So I think the poem itself has a real surreal quality to it. Mm-hmm. What part of you is living for what you began living for? One of my students asked for a time machine, redoing his 10 years on Earth. I step backwards. I rush out to the playground, cracking open a torso littered with canaries, letting my fingertips brush each little heart, the lemony souls asleep. Forgive me for believing I could see them wake up. All I have now, these overripe bananas, a mistake to think they could fly to where I would dance with you, our feet sailing across the empty square, right up to where the light becomes the sea. Come join me then on the rails whose cars reach the same forward and backwards, the whistle trill taking our travels to the tunnel's lip, quivering in darkness, never to cut a classical figure, but we were, your nodding head on my shoulder, a boy in the facing seat up on his knees, steaming the window with his breath. And this last poem from this book I'm going to read is called Bridge, and it's very much about being a widow. And it comes from a dream that I had about bridges, so that's in there too in the poem. Bridge. A child trying on her mother's high heels for the first time, imagining your death so hard to balance. We weren't sure then the way the future sweetened on the tongue. Widow, now. Its Indo-European root, be empty, Sanskrit, be destitute, and from the Latin, bereft. I am a blind beggar, once again less important than the voice on the other line. Is the urge to put my head down on the counter while writing this, like my forearm pushing down on the sun, swallowed by the flatness, the long back of another day. Finally, the anticipated, the hummingbird feeder shattered by the wind's trapezing, just when their visits were getting serious. I am delusional following a trio of handily constructed suspension bridges, a need making passage easier with my hand in yours, just as the spring azure closes its wings, seemingly disappearing in a flash of light, an escape so perfect that it never left, says what I mean better than trying to analyze if the bridges are leading to insight or when all else fails, my boredom with such emptiness. Allow me just this once again, a blue angel of a day, bread rising under a damp towel, a series of rooms raised high above the storm's transfusion, the impossible motoring of tiny wings heard for miles, your breath in my ears, asleep. So I should have mentioned, you heard it all, that this is where the title of the book comes from, that poem. So now I'm going to turn to the What of Underfoot.
I
And
just wanted to say one thing. It's such a gorgeous line. When you say, allow me just this once, again, a blue angel of a day, bread rising under a damp towel. Wow. How, putting that line together, that is just so exquisite.
Yeah.
I love it.
Thank you. It just comes to you, right, Charles? Right? It just, when you're in that place, that wonderful place of creating, really losing yourself in there. The first poem I'm going to read is the first poem in the book, and it's called Ordinary. And it comes from, I read a editorial in the New York Times by an American expat in Japan. He's an author named Pico Ayer, and he was writing about the Japanese philosophy of time and of time passing. And that's something that interests me a lot. Ordinary. To learn something new, the path you took yesterday, take that. Pledge yourself to familiarity. In routine, in constancy, there's a vitality. Kiss me once, twice, 3 times before bed. Look around the waiting room. Appreciate the tabloid's currency, the one patient whose leg won't stop shaking, reading gloss until he's called. Worrying the spirea and roses, your neighbor describes her son's kindergarten, asking for more than the loud impress of the teacher's personality. Resolving to listen, become quite typical in the stunning late autumn afternoon. Gather then in the cathedral of mahogany leaves ablaze in the outside, end of beauty, exclamation marks around the mouth, graying brows, eyelids shedding leaves and hair. In this season of mounting darkness, I am no wiser than decades ago over what we do to each other. Let's flock to the scenic route for a few weeks this fall. Take my hand then, bring me closer, that's all. And I want everyone to imagine that I'm working in my classroom and I'm after school working, and it's February, and it's when I leave to go to the parking lot, it's dark, it's getting dark, it's cold, and I look up overhead and I see this V of geese flying, and that's what happened. And I went home and wrote this poem called After School, right from that image. And it goes, today I want to talk to the geese, ask them why they're only 4, whether I'm looking for meaning in the wrong place. The late afternoon sky this February is all woolly, hanging into the landscape. It takes forever to leave this all behind. This lifetime of exclamations as I cross the parking lot. Geese honk from behind to encourage speed up front. I want them to be outraged over our former president, mixing up the Japanese prime minister with the South Korean for using fourth grade superlatives like tremendous and stupendous, ignoring the warming lake, circumventing migration. What if even when I die, what they say to each other remains a secret? If all I should have cared about was how the upwash of the goose ahead supports the bird behind, lifting it beyond its own strength. Here's when my arms raise above my head, not in surrender, but imagining our brief conversation as a lifting out of myself. I might be getting closer to reading Buddhist texts or Wittgenstein about consciousness, as right now I'm the shawl of sky the geese move through.
That is gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. That was one of those, just go home and write, right? This poem came from literally a summer, flowers on the table in in the middle of our table, azaleas, peonies in kind of a round bowl. And that started this poem. It's called Full Bowl. Azaleas at dusk, just after the scorch of sun, before they fade, background light of evening. A child throws herself on the big world of pavement, counting each part of a ladybug. Does it have a heart? The setting is not an end, but carries our future inside its ever present. Carries what we know of the world, its wine spilled last night, the peonies in their decadence pouring over the circle of the graying vase, caught in impermanence before their petals will release in the over bounty. The brushstrokes that evoke the light, white and wide with desire. The whole world wants to enter that jab of color, swallowing change with its insistent longing. Let us into this way of seeing, convey what we can only observe, know that something happens outside the frame, the blue door we cannot enter. If we could, we might never have to leave. Full bowl on the table. So I referred earlier to my research on swans, and this is called Mute Swan, and this is what came out of these swans that I saw in a body of water and realized I wanted to know more. Mute swan, mate for life, dying of heartbreak after a partner goes, 8-foot wingspan unfolding. Folding oneself into another is risky, a friend said, stirring a coffee. What if this is more than is bearable? Close the fold and crease. Say a prayer that all my kindnesses will be remembered by the mute swans, the canal I wish I lived by. Fold means so much. The dog-eared pages I turn down as I read, looking for words to chant. I don't use a pen. When it is over, I find words strung together endlessly. White lights the constellation of Cygnus, viewable this time of year. Look at a child, a book of kites, miracle of origami, unfolding, flying away. The book won't close until the child catches and folds into himself the leavings. The man who reaches up in the linden, places the wet-winged painted lady on the budding branch, sees it joined quickly by another in the music of wing beats and colors unfolding. At 4½ months, flying lessons begin, their tiny wings hinged in the unfolding, the kiss of the female or pen as the cygnets lift off her back, this life, this very good life. In ways I am folded by you into a crease of cotton t-shirts with light pressure holding it still, into a fortune teller spread like a rumor through my fourth graders, its names and predictions of children in the folds, the 1,000 cranes before we die, the only way to refold the tape-strewn map, the trick in the stack of folded fitted sheets, the swishing created by the wings of a mute swan in flight can be heard a mile away, each wing a page, widowed by words. We follow how their shadows fold up and down back into the night. And the last poem that I'm going to read from the What of Underfoot is actually inspired by Susan Stewart. It's her poem Yellow Stars and Ice, and it refers to her in the poem, and it's also about my brother taking his life. So it's called My Poetry Teacher Bought My Painting, My Brother Took His Life. I am as far as the horseshoe nailed over the old barn door, and you are as far as my river mouth canvas. He is the brother who lassoed a gun to his head. You are how we circled around you, covered wagons filled with night terrors and smoke. He is my brother who might, after dark, suggest I gouge my thighs and forearms. I am as far as your horse Sterling, as my memory scraped gravel deep from its hooves. He is the one who wasn't hungry, drinking the bottle he held to the light, leaving the label pressed to the bathroom mirror. You are the mother who read her 3-year-old poem and spoke of temporality, a frame as another year ends. I am the one who thinks of you right before you appear on Forbidden Drive or leaving the Chinese restaurant as we sit down. You are the one delighting in my thesis, Who's Who, thinking I dreamt of Emily Dickinson. I am the one 20 years later who crumbled on the headmaster's rug like I had any idea what to do. He is the one who locked the bathroom door, never reading a single one of my poems, never showing them to him. Black and white warblers lost their way. That's that poem. And I have time, right, Charles, to read a couple of new poems?
Sure, you have time.
Right? Okay. This poem, Carpenter Lane, is named after a street that I lived on with my late husband and daughter in West Mount Airy. Your problem is you think language has a high surface, moth wings turned up to catch rain, mouth you can't get a grasp on. It's not displaying the words, pretending there is an outcome, closing the book after the last page, pulling the sheet over the corpse. Don't look so hard. In one picture, his face takes up the whole frame. See you, love, even though there are wings, I sweep off the writing desk. The cats are weeping. Listen while I try once again to explain what we take away. Their tails go up, thud the air. Fed, they appear a mystery, why they cry. Still, their coloring is not close to yours. Maybe humans have lost before loss. There is a flutter of sounds. I make you notice where we are, show you your lips blue against my skin. Tell me my shoulders no longer sad could build a house. We plant a garden by shades of green, sage, fennel, sorrel, eucalyptus, blackberry. Those tints hold on to them as mourning doves spread their feathers a set of ribs. I am here where there has to be more than years forming a tree. I still make my hearts even by folding, cutting them out of paper. And let's see, I'm going to read something called An Old Home, and it's about trying to understand age, which time, which is another theme that comes up in my work, and I don't understand it, but maybe the poems help me get through some part of it. An old poem. Aging is impossible. I give up and find again the cow that folds its legs, announcing rain. Perfect saguaro with two arms up, tired enough to shrug. No one sees it move. I could have asked you, who is our Carr or our heart? Sunlight scooped and deposited a bowl of grief. Story ending, cut loose, red balloon crisscrossing corn, knee-high. Now I mix up R and hour, the hour while my umbrella waits before dawn. Fingertips drumming rain, robin tilts head back drinking, the bird bath overflowing. I knew it. Computer implants in brain synapses connecting where words fail in this fallen world. We all have our edge of space. Pictures are only smacks of predestination. If you want windows and mirrors, lie. Nothing will hold what's bound to happen. The photographer lens stops time. Two intersecting dogwoods resign their flowers. The wind armed with rain. Our dog hates this kind of weather. Don't know his age. And the last poem I'm going to read is in 7 short parts, and it's called October. 1. We ask for little in life, leaves, palette, a bite of sky. The words carry more weight than your entire body. Where are you? I am by the outskirts, having only asked for flesh and bone. 2. Sliding my request over a screen door opening. First frost freezes, water inside the gardens burst and die. The undoing belief of a crossover, just words, this world. Ha! I purposely fall backwards into a pile of leaves. Their 4th grade faces show disbelief, brown leaves parting for this body. 3. Which one of us continue absorbing beauty? After your death, I ordered 300 cards to thank people for words. Soon the trees will fall still, have sky for leaves, ringed by a choir of red-capped birds. 4. Broken body, all you can do to feed yourself alone in the most alone of places. Have you ever wished that there was no meaning left in words? 5. Do you live without me? 6. There is only this October. You left on a boat with oars, your fingers catching the drowned. 7. Language outlines light. We make life, we take it away. And Charles, is there time for one more short poem?
Sure.
Okay. Because this is called The Story of My Life. So again, trying to figure things out. And I was thinking about this title, that the way people say, oh, that's the story of my life. Let me tell you. So we can think of the poem that way too. story of my life. I took a hard fall on the sidewalk. This morning, both palms stained purple. Words drill through the surface to unfurl beneath the skin. There's been a couple of times when I almost set the house on fire, totaled cars, lost dogs, dead heroes, perfect light, bath water. Looking back, there was so much I didn't know. I'd like to tell you the particulars of when I wasn't going to be what I hoped. It was well past 28, the year the psychic said I'd be a rich and famous painter and writer. Around that time, I started believing that fourth graders could work to reach their dreams, even if I hadn't. This is not a dream, but memory, time imagined and stored, not like a photo. A woman in a boat rowing the perimeter of a mountain lake, talking herself into herself. The wings of the great blue heron opening across her shoulders, the snack bar closed for the night. So that is the last poem I'm going to read.
This has really been absolutely wonderful, Julia.
Rich, thank you.
Sumptuous poetry. You know, as I say, Philly's a great place. I was born and raised here, there's a lot of love of poetry in the city, and there's a lot of poets that add to that love of poetry. And your poems tonight were showing an example of what we have in stock in Philadelphia in poetry. So I'm very, very grateful
that you I'm so joined grateful. Us. Thank you.
Joined us, and the discussion of your poems and the reading of your poems was just absolutely wonderful. And I want to thank also Aaron Phelan, who has been our program director tonight from Philly Cam to make this happen, and all the people at Philly Cam that have made this show happen for over 6 years. And the last thing I want to say, one of Julia's books is a Moonstone publication, and this is it. So, the Moonstone Art Center is a publisher, a sponsor, a creator of love of poetry. Larry is a person that has put together close to 100 opportunities for poetry in the city of Philadelphia. Most recently, he's putting together an anthology dedicated to the remembrance of Hiroshima. And I just ask our audience, this is a big, big thing. There's nobody that does as much for poetry in this area, period, than Larry and the Moonstone Art Center. So I ask you to go to our site, moonstoneartcenter.org, and see a way that you can contribute and support arts, poetry, and the Moonstone Arts. And I thank everybody for looking in. I think this is a real treat tonight. And we love poetry. Yeah. So I hope to see you next month with another fabulous Philadelphia poet. And it should be great. It's remarkable. It's grand, as they say in Ireland. Yeah. And so good night. And I will see you next time.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you, everyone who came and watched. And what a privilege this has been. So thank you for this opportunity. Great. Thank you.